Today's panel includes Josie Douglas, General Manager of Professional Services at the Central Land Council, Nerida Brown, Tepetigi Aboriginal Corporation from the West Coast, Cape York, sitting in the middle, Laura Dreyfus, at the end, Senior Lawyer at the Environmental Justice Australia, Kath McLeish is the Legal Practice Manager Native Title at the Northern Land Council, and we also have Catherine Gilby, who is filling in for Maureen Numbajimpa O'Keefe, Kaditch Walpuri woman that unfortunately is not able to be present today, but has prepared a really powerful speech, which is going to ground the discussion, and Catherine is going to start with that speech. And Catherine is a friend of Maureen, who's a director at Running Water Community Press, a truth-telling and storytelling organisation, and the first author-run cooperative in the world, and a First Nations organisation.
Has everyone seen the beautiful film about protecting water at Singleton Station, where Maureen features and Maureen is the leader of that whole movement? So Singleton Station is going to be allocated a water lease in the middle of the desert that's as large as Sydney Harbour. And Maureen is like the champion of that movement. She's created a really beautiful video, and I think they're going to play it tomorrow. And then you'll get to see her and see her voice, because it's a very personal speech that she's written. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll talk about Maureen quickly. So my name's Catherine Gilby, and I'm an Aoyawara person. So our country runs, it's northeast of Alice Springs, up along the Sandover, up into Lake Nash, into Camberwell. And my people did 2 great migrations up from Umbludawatch up into Lake Nash, all through the cattle stations, and so our country is connected, is what I'm saying. So it's a very, it's my great honour to be able to read Maureen's words, because my great-grandmother and my grandmother accessed all that water when they walked from Umbludawatch up to Alperilum. And Maureen's fight now is my fight too. And so it's an odd thing to read her words, but she's unwell at this minute, but it was really important that her story was told. So I wouldn't usually, but for right now, I'm going to read her words out, because it was really important that she actually got to have her voice heard here. And I do encourage you all to go and watch the video. So she's got this really quiet tone, cadence to her voice, which I feel like I can't do any justice to, but I'm just going to do it as me talking her words for her. Our stories and our songlines crisscross across Australia, connecting us. That makes us First Nations, one big family. Our ancestral land, we have ancient ties through our direct descendants to this land, through our bloodlines from our ancestors, our heritage, our identity, our spirituality. My custodial responsibility is to protect my mother's land. There's a songline that goes from Waka to Wakopa. It's a sacred fruit for women, and it runs through that Singleton pastoral area. Our land was never bought or sold, and I don't get why white people see it as a money sign. But to us, it is our cultural heritage and identity too. The way the system worked in this place was very different to how white people viewed our land. For us, this land is important. It means so much to us. It is part of who we are and where we come from. Our songlines and stories and lore are embedded in this land. We don't have a storybook. Ours is a whole history passed down via songlines and storytelling. White man needs a really good education about why land is really important to the First Nations of Australia, because we belong to the land. I am fighting this big water licence at Singleton because it is about survival and our human rights. Water is life. We don't have rights to this water. We were denied those rights to water in the colonial days. But it is still our water, including that underground water. That water is part of our heritage. Singleton Station was built by my family, the Kaditch and Walpuri people, and they worked there, hard labour, helped build that station. If it wasn't for them, Singleton wouldn't be there today. You know, it is all because of my family's hard labour. It is part of my history, and that is why I fight for Singleton Station. The people that worked there were the massacre survivors. It's all their hard work. They worked literal blood, sweat and tears, and they should acknowledge that. How it was built back then, you know. It was a home for my family when they didn't have a home because of how the government system worked back in the day, moving people around here and there. My people lived right next door to Ali Kurung, even before Ali Kurung was built in the 1950s as Warrabri Mission. Ali Kurung was built because of water shortages at Phillip Creek Mission, because the people ran out of water and moved to Ali Kurung, because they found an abundance of water. The people that built it were the Warramungu, Kadich and Warlpiri people, and that is why the community is built there today. My grandfather was a Kadich man, and he helped dig wells for the white people in that area, Wycliffe, Singleton, Greenwood and Walkup. Kadich land is a great big land. You can't find above ground water there, but it is mainly soakages around there. All the water is stored under the ground at the soaks. The drinking water is underground, covered up, and if you dig at the soaks, you can find water, like in a well. Our ancestors used this water a lot in the bush, in the desert country. My people, the Kadich people, have been going backwards and forwards to Barrow Creek, moving from soakage to soakage. That is a history that has been taught to us from our grandparents that we know today. We did a historic walk with those old people, all the soakages, one last time in 2008, from Boney Well to Barrow Creek. It's about 140 kilometres. And each soak belongs to a different family. That is why we are trying to keep the story alive for the next generation to come. We want to share stories and songs with the next generation and teach them about their Aboriginal identity and heritage and their connection to land and how important it is. We want to preserve our language and culture and country that we belong to, and that is why I keep fighting for the Kadich land at Singleton. I am a storyteller and story keeper in my family. I teach young girls about traditional dancing, our cultural heritage and the bush medicine too. Going out bush, telling stories in the night time, that is the best time to tell stories, singing and dancing. I really love that Singleton from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Catherine, for sharing this deeply emotional story. I'm going to pass a question to Kath, which is, it's tough. We're hearing these stories and then talking about the legal systems that interact with this context. Kath, what can you tell us about the massive extent of the native title estate in Northern Australia, where it exists, and what rights people have in relation to land clearing and water extraction?
Thanks, Alex. And firstly, thank you to Gabrielle and Donna for welcoming me and the rest of us here today. And thank you to all of the TOs and First Nations people here today for your continuing generous teaching of the rest of us. I'm here from the NLC, the Northern Land Council. I'm happy to get this question. I can't match any of the passion and depth of Aboriginal law that we've just been honoured to be able to hear. But I would like to demystify a couple of key things about how native title law works at the moment, and particularly on pastoral lands, because it's such a significant, enormous tract of the north of Australia is pastoral land. Native title is a far from perfect system, but it's a piece of the puzzle of the current status quo of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights in country. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what that is currently offering, so that when we talk about current and future justice, we can all work together, I guess. I also want to acknowledge that native title has been a very sad and destructive story for this place, for Larrakia people. It hasn't done what people hoped it would do for land justice around Darwin. So, but I want to say that hopefully, and I believe that that fight's not over yet either. So native title is recognised by Anglo-Australian colonial law. It's not created by the court and it's not created by legislation. It's always been here. Native title law recognises that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law have always been here. And we have that since Mabo. Native title has survived colonisation, but the Crown was recognised to have the power to take land as it sees fit and grant that to other people, which it continues to do. In the north of Australia, native title coexists with pastoral leases. The Northern Land Council includes a number of pastoral stations. The Northern Land Council is the rep body, or the representative body for the top end of the Northern Territory, which covers about 1.1 million square kilometres, which is half onshore and half offshore. Of the onshore area, roughly 300,000 square kilometres are subject to native title, either determined or under claim or can be claimed. That's roughly the size of Italy. When I figured out that comparison, I thought that can't be right. It's huge, but apparently Italy's a very big country. So these numbers don't include Aboriginal land under land rights, which is not really the question. That's the NT land rights system. But if you do combine land rights and native title, then about 86% of the top half of the NT does have Aboriginal rights to country in place. In the NT, so the centre of Australia and the top end of Australia, there are about 220 pastoral stations. And as we've just heard in Maureen's words, they were built by Aboriginal labour, by the blood, sweat and tears, as she said. So it's a continuing complex relationship, legal and obviously in people's own lives, which I'm not here to talk about that, but I am here to talk about the sort of white-fella legal side, I guess. So managing these rights on pastoral stations is really hard for native title holding groups. They have to be creative, they have to be a bit lucky if they've got some source of resources coming in. The Indigenous ranger groups that we're all probably a little bit familiar with doing incredible work for country and people don't tend to have a footprint on native title land, or certainly not on pastoral native title land. They tend to operate on Aboriginal freehold, held under land rights or in parks as well. So what native title does provide is a right to negotiate over major mining projects, but the question, of course, was about land clearing and water rights. And there is no right for groups to negotiate there. They don't have a veto over anything on pastoral country, but they do have procedural rights known as the right to comment about water extraction licences. Some of these procedural rights are just only what the general public has access to doing in when there are public notices of an intention to grant a water permit or a land clearing permit. A lot of these permits, such as the Singleton licence, which is extraordinary, not in the region that I work with, and land clearing, they have obviously enormous impacts on country and native title enjoyment on country, around habitat destruction, around impact on sites, sacred sites and heritage, interference with people's ability to camp or hunt or find their bush tucker, bush medicine. So at the NLC, we push as much as we can with those very limited rights when we have the capacity and when native title holders would like us to take actions such as making submissions. The native title holders' submissions can be ignored by the government decision makers in the granting of these interests to clear land or to give water licences. Occasionally we can take these decisions to court, but we can only challenge decisions where we can see that there's a legal mistake in the way the decision maker made that decision. We can't challenge it just because it's a poor decision for native title holders or for habitat. So clearly the regime here gives very, very little input to native title holders and their organisations. So I'll probably leave it at that, but it's a system that I think is worth understanding a bit better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kath. And I think it's an important segue to Josie in terms of maybe a practical example that's been playing out right now. Native title holders in the Central Land Council have had some significant news in the last few weeks with respect to this Singleton licence on Kaditch country. Would you mind telling us a bit about the Singleton station development and why did you need to go all the way to the High Court?
Thank you. It certainly is a win. 2 weeks ago, the High Court granted special leave to hear the native title holders' case against the NT government over the water licence for the Singleton project. This is after 2 unsuccessful legal proceedings, but native title holders didn't give up and the Central Land Council didn't give up, and we're following the instructions of native title holders. So It's a huge congratulations is deserved to all native title holders and affected traditional owners. So that's an important point too. It's native title and ALRA. The case isn't one, I have to say, but obtaining special leave from the High Court to have their appeal heard is a great achievement, and native title holders should be extremely proud of their strength to keep fighting despite the setbacks over the last few years. And I'd also like to acknowledge Maureen Nampijimpa O'Keefe, who can't be here today, but as a Kadich cultural custodian has worked tirelessly to defend her mother's country. And I also have to acknowledge the people we have lost along the way, and we do this work alongside native title holders for future generations. And I'd also like to acknowledge Larrakia people, Gabrielle and Donna, for their welcome. The Singleton project highlights the structural inequalities baked into our water laws and weaknesses in the Native Title Act that advantage industry and undermine Aboriginal people's self-determination. The Singleton project is for an irrigated fruit and vegetable farm about 130 kilometres south of Tennant Creek on Kadich country. The Mbora Aboriginal Corporation acts as the agent for native title holders for the Singleton area, and Kadich people have cared and lived on country for millennia, and they have cultural rights and responsibilities for that country, as we heard from Maureen's statement. Their neighbours are the Warramungu, Alyawarra, Walpiri, and Mudgera and Walmanpa people, who have also deep and enduring cultural connections to the area. The country is rich in bush tucker medicine, hunting grounds, and ancient water places. And dreaming stories connect a vast array of sacred sites across the landscape, including soakages and springs, ghost gums, bloodwood, and coolabah trees. And Mbora itself is a word for water lilies. Fortune Agribusiness has held a pastoral lease at Singleton Station since 2016 and wants to use part of that pastoral lease for irrigated horticulture, citrus, melons and other long-term crops, grown primarily for the overseas export market. In November 2021, Fortune was granted a groundwater licence to extract up to 40 billion litres a year, every year, once the project is at full capacity for 30 years. I'm not making this up. It's hard to get a feel for just how much water that is. It is the biggest groundwater licence in the NT and likely all of Australia, close to what the whole of Darwin region uses each year, about 44 billion litres of water. The next biggest NT groundwater licence jumps down to 15 billion litres per year for a farm on Tipperary Station. If the project goes ahead, it will pull over 1 trillion litres of ancient water from the ground. This is double the amount of water in the whole of Sydney Harbour. This means that the project has a much larger potential impact area than the project site itself. The farm and bores sit on Singleton Station, but over the life of the project will draw water from the aquifer, stretching tens of kilometres out to Neutral Junction and Murray Down pastoral stations and the Warrabri and Iliana Aboriginal Land Trusts. This country, with shallow groundwater that gives life to trees, springs, soaks and wetlands, this is a country that does that. Expert analysis shows that the project will likely draw down the aquifer by 50 metres in some places and lower the groundwater table by at least 5 metres across a 50-kilometre stretch. Life that depends on this top fraction of water will likely be destroyed. And there are at least 40 sacred sites in the area that may be affected by this project, and almost all of them are groundwater dependent. These sacred sites could be lost forever. Native title holders explain the profound heartbreak and enduring cultural and physical stress this will cause. Yet the NT government denied that this water extraction licence would impact native title rights. Under the Native Title Act, a future act is an act that may affect native title rights and interests in relation to lands and waters to any extent. The Future Act provisions give native title holders the right to be notified about the proposal, the opportunity to comment, and significantly to compensation from the government for any damage to native title rights. These rights are inadequate when compared to the scale of this water licence. The Australian Law Reform Commission is currently considering reforms to the Future Act provisions so that native title holders are given rights that align with the level of impact to their country. And those reforms can't come soon enough. Undoubtedly, this groundwater extraction licence will impact native title rights to some extent. Yet the NT government refused to even acknowledge this and continue to deny that water extraction licences constitute a future act across the NT. To deny this is to erase and undermine native title rights. Without recognition of water licences as a future act, native title holders have had to rely on anti-water laws to defend their rights and interests. These laws have since been removed and eroded by the NT government. Fortune, the company, also does not have sacred site clearance certificates that covers the entire impact area. The certificate they do have from ARPA only covers the farm site and actually misses 5 sacred sites, soakages that rely on groundwater. There are well-documented gaps in the NT government and Fortune's baseline information about the groundwater and cultural values. So there is significant uncertainty about what the impacts of this water use and project could actually be on sacred sites, ecosystems and water qualities. Vague notions of adaptive management are inadequate for protecting sacred sites from groundwater extraction in this context. Even the best adaptive management is extremely difficult in uncertain groundwater contexts. Once the signs of harm are visible, it is often too late to manage. And you cannot, of course, under the Sacred Sites Act or Aboriginal traditional law, offset or repair a sacred site once it's damaged. To enable this level of potential destruction, the NT government went against the rules of the original water allocation plan to protect GDEs and instead created a guideline that allows for 30% of groundwater dependent ecosystems to be destroyed. This arbitrary figure is not based on robust evidence. The only stakeholder involved in consultation for this guideline was the one that will benefit from it, and that was the company, Fortune Agribusiness. For projects of this scale with so much risk, it would be reasonable to expect convincing evidence of significant long-term local benefits and public good. This is not the case here. Peer-reviewed analysis of the claims about local jobs and economic investment have found that they are grossly overstated, based on unrealistic predictions from completely different contexts. Most of the jobs will go to FIFO workers, and investment in the NT's economy is greatly overestimated. Many of us here know this, but I need to emphasise it here again. Fortune is getting all of this water for free. This project would not be economically viable anywhere else because the water use alone would cost between $70 and $300 million in other parts of Australia. This is the hidden subsidy that distorts the economic viability of this project. Since CLC first consulted on the licence application in 2020, the message from native title holders, affected TOs and community members has been clear. This place is not your sacrifice zone, and we've heard that term over the last few days. Initially, native title holders and TOs asked the Minister for a merits review of the Water Controller's decision to grant the licence. Minister Warden decided over the whole of one busy weekend to re-grant the licence in November 21 and for a few new conditions and against the expert advice of her Water Resources Review Panel. In December 21, native title holders instructed CLC to challenge the Minister's decision to re-grant the licence, and this is when we started the judicial review and went to court. Also to acknowledge that the Arid Lands Environment Centre also went to court against the Minister. Of course, these challenges that we've brought, we've seen the NT government deliberately erode protections, making it harder and harder to hold them to account. Throughout this period, the NT government stripped back the relevant water plan for the area, the Western Devonport Water Allocation Plan, the plan has been gutted of meaningful content that could be used to guide best practice. More recently, in March this year, the NT government made amendments to make a range of decisions immune to merits review, including water licence. So the integral first step we took to protect native title rights, in this case, a step broadly recognised across Australia as fundamental to democracy, is no longer possible. The government abolished the expert panel whose only job was to give advice to the minister. These are all the hidden aspects behind this case that needs to be brought to light. So this is why native title holders have had to keep fighting and why they have gone all the way to the High Court. In September, the High Court granted special leave to only 5 of the 48 applications that it received. Mburrumbura Aboriginal Corporation was one of those. So 5 out of 48. It did not give reasons, but the High Court takes into account things like the legal importance of the case, error in the application of law, and interests of justice and the likelihood of success. The High Court will consider whether the minister actually took Aboriginal cultural values into account or properly considered if there were exceptional circumstances that justified a licence for 30 years. No date has been set yet for the hearing. It is likely to be next year. And of course that will depend when the court can fit it in. And just to finish and wrap up, and thank you for listening. Until the High Court makes a decision, the water licence is still valid. However, the NT's Environment Protection Act means that Fortune can't start using that water under that licence until it's completed its environmental impact statement and gets the necessary approvals under the legislation. The CLC and native title holders are working to make sure the environmental impact statement is a robust and rigorous process. As well as the High Court challenge, it's another way that native title holders are trying to protect their culture, sacred sites, hunting and gathering grounds, and other important stories and places that this project puts at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. From native title to nature, I might bring in Laura Dreyfus from Environmental Justice Australia. Can you tell us about the failings of our nature laws to protect the precious nature of Northern Australia?
Thanks, Alex. As a lawyer at Environmental Justice Australia, we try and build and support on the amazing advocacy and knowledge of traditional owners. Going to Alex's question, I guess, about the nature laws in the Northern Territory and federally and how they're failing to protect our nature at the moment. I've been working mainly on land clearing in the Northern Territory for the past few years. And yeah, there is an amazing amount of development happening on the pastoral estate and particularly land clearing, and it's increasing rapidly. In this year alone, we've seen over 31,000 hectares of land approved to be cleared on the pastoral estate, and there's over 10,000 hectares that's currently under assessment, and that's just in the Northern Territory alone. So it's huge quantities of land, and as we heard from the scientists on the previous panel, this is intact savanna, it's precious, it's some of the largest remaining intact savanna in the world, and it's scary to think that so much of it is being destroyed. In relation to land clearing on the pastoral estate in the Northern Territory, it's governed by the Pastoral Land Act, and like we heard on this panel, the Pastoral Land Act doesn't say anything about consulting with native title holders if a pastoralist wants to apply for a land clearing permit. I know there are rules under the Native Title Act, which I'm not very familiar with, but there's nothing specific in the Pastoral Land Act about that. It's also the only jurisdiction in Australia without specific native vegetation laws. So we've got this act, the Pastoral Land Act, which isn't designed to protect nature, but that's what's being used to assess land clearing applications in the Northern Territory. There's no requirement to carry out environmental surveys or to see what threatened species there are in the land before the clearing can take place. So often we don't know what's being cleared before it's cleared. And in the Northern Territory, that's particularly problematic sometimes because it's vast and it's remote and it's not particularly inhabited, there's not much data about what's there. From a scientific perspective, there's a lot of knowledge, obviously, but nature laws look at threatened species, they looked at the ecological values, and that's understudied in the Northern Territory. Some more specifics about, I guess, land clearing laws in the NT. Up to 5,000 hectares of land can be approved to be cleared without an environmental assessment, which is a lot. It's big. I mean, recently we've seen even the CLP have removed, in the Territory Parks and Wildlife Act, they've removed the requirement to get a permit to interfere with wildlife if you get a pastoral land clearing permit. That wasn't a particularly utilised provision, but they've got rid of that protection as well. We'll move quickly to our federal laws, and the main piece of legislation that governs this sort of action is the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, the EPBC Act, which I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of. And under the EPBC Act, if a proposal is likely to have a significant impact on matters of national environmental significance, like threatened species, migratory species, Ramsar sites, then it has to be referred for environmental assessment. So you would think that land clearing of, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hectares would be referred for environmental assessment, but we're not seeing that happening. In fact, we've seen the first ever land clearing referral under the EPBC Act in the past month. And that's the first time a land clearing proposal in the NT has been referred for assessment under the EPBC Act. And it's I guess it's, maybe that's some little progress, seeing that a thorough environmental assessment will take place to assess the impacts of land clearing, but we'd like to see more land clearing getting properly assessed so that we know what values are being destroyed before it's gone. I think it's been mentioned today as well, but there's obviously a big process going on at the moment. The government's consulting on proposed reforms to the EPBC Act, and we're, as an organisation, EJ is engaging in that process and really hoping that it brings an opportunity for greater protection for nature in the Northern Territory. And yeah, I didn't want to be so depressing, but maybe there's room for change slowly.
Thank you, Laura, for providing that context on how nature laws are failing and the intersection with the rights and interests of people, and how nature and native title rights, there's major limitations here. I'm excited to hand over to Nerida. From the arid lands to the sea, how does native title affect both land and sea country, and how does that restrict the ability to protect country? Can you give examples of that from West Coast Cape York?
Well, first and foremost, my name is Trata Larakawana. I come from Guatu of Cape York. I pay my Putikina Rapana to the Larakia Mulquiri, which is I am a woman from the Trata, which is Barramundi head law, where I come from, and I come humbly with the highest law to Larakia country. I pay my respects to every Yolngu person in this room, for I am a guest on your country. I come humbly. And for your question, straightforward native title is the most racist piece of legislation going. I am not going to sit here, pussyfoot around. You environmentalist people are worried about climate change. We are your answer. So the question back to you fellas is, how are you going to support us to go to the international realm and say, can you stop taking our resources, please? Because by you doing that, you are dismantling our identity and country to this country, this continent. Now, with the development and native title, it's actually coercing our people to give away our rights. That's straight up. Cape York is facing a claim of one claim. It is the most ridiculous thing you've ever come across. Okay? I don't know if Cape York Land Council actually had the backbone to come to this forum here for this week, which I pretty well doubt. But if you're here, give me a wave, because I doubt you are. But respect to the other land councils, good on yous, because yous actually do care. Because your decisions and your laws are affecting the people who live on country. In my book, in my bag here, I said to myself I wasn't going to be so political, but nah.
You have the floor.
So this is the expectations they want our people to learn. This is the Native Title Act 93. So you want your answer? There you go. We've got the Aboriginal Land Acts 91. We have UNDRIP, which is your international laws in protecting Indigenous people's laws. Yeah, okay. In this whole bag, the most important legislation to me as a sovereign woman to this continent, my country, my law system, and as a Bama Cape York woman, here look, is our treaties from all 11 tribes where I come from. This is the way forward, people. Empower us as black men and women, because every time you knock a tree down, you extract water out from this continent, you're taking a bit of our soul. I think our people cannot spare no more for greed. And what for? For overseas people to become more better, inventors and all the rest of it? Well, we're dying. Are they going to open their door to their country to then we become refuge to another man's land? No, you're right. I'd rather stay here and die. So that's our treaties and our agreements. So if there's any politicians in this room, I'll be more than happy to sit here and actually challenge you on your legislations and the racist behaviour as this policy of native title. And when I said coerced, I'm saying that we are now being forced to agree on upon agreements that gives away our human rights. We can't have a say. Because some white fellas ended up turning around and saying, well, in my professional opinion, yeah, okay, we are the walking evidence here. We know why those systems and the minerals and everything in the earth and the water is placed there. You take one out, everything else going to collapse. And another auntie who been just talk about spiritual warfare. It is a spiritual warfare because you're removing our essence from country. You're removing our identity. I don't mean if I'm offending you as a lawyer or whatever, but we live it every day. You know what I mean? And I challenge you to actually look up one claim in Cape York. From the base, I got Auntie Sharon here, she's a Yallanji woman, and I come from the tip. Our countries are the only sea where the fresh water goes straight across from the west to the east. And we got big law for river systems. So what's going to stop us? This native title legislation here. We'll come and see you to hear what you want, but we're the decision makers. But yet it's people like us, me and Auntie Sharon, who are actually held liable to our neighbouring tribes because of development. Rio Tinto is where in Weipa, our country has never been the same. Up until yesterday when I landed in Gove and to see how much Gove has changed, man, it made me feel proud. Because 20 years ago, it was just blood red like Weipa. Now it's just like, oh, am I really in Gove? Why? Because the people were actually given the rights to go back and regenerate country. They took, that authority to care for country. So when is Weipa going to start doing that? And I will say it, Queensland is the most racist state going. Our country has just been dedicated for mining and that's it. So it does feel we are still living in flora and fauna laws systems. I absolutely take my hat off to you, Yungal mob, Noongar, because you actually do have more rights than us bummers in Cape York. Queensland in general, you've actually got more rights. So if there's any way we can work together as being successful and then working with organisations for environmental protection, that's the only way we're going to defeat white-collar crime, because that's what it is, it's white-collar crime. And I got emotional when I've been listening to that story because those are things now that Queensland needs to hear. But yet, Queensland's the most dedicated place to, for essential mining, whatever, bauxite, you name it, it's all there. And then the renewable energy, my only thing worry about that is that every time when somebody ends up coming up with a bright idea, I worry for country, because to get solar panels, you need sand. And where I come from, we remove the sand, the tip of Australia, like Cape York, will snap in half because our country is made from sand and bauxite and ironstone. So where does that leave us? All the funding going to the land councils, that was one point I wanted to point out here as well. Maybe it's about time you use environmental organisations like CAFNIC and EDO and that actually go and challenge the state and federal government and say, hey, yous don't represent the people because yous don't care about land, so why don't you go and put some funding into our organisations who actually does defend First Nations people. So I hope I have planted a seed there. If anyone's got any questions, please approach, but definitely development and native title does seize our rights, human rights altogether. We've got no say, and the native title legislation should be abolished because it's no better than the apartheid law system. Have a read of it. That's all I've got to say. I will leave it now before I become, Thank you.